I was raised in what I believe to be the quintessential American family. My name is Helen Anderson. Even though my parents and I didn't have much money when we initially moved into our small starter house, we were content there. Among all the men I've known, my dad, James Anderson, worked more than anyone else. From humble beginnings with only 2 vehicles, he painstakingly expanded his transportation company into a thriving enterprise. During the beginning, he insisted on doing all of the truck maintenance himself, and I remember that Dad would occasionally return home drenched in grease. In her younger years, Mom, whose name is Sarah, though I rarely address her by that name these days, was a manager at a restaurant. Even though she was often griping about her job, she was actually pretty competent at it. She would tell James, "I want to be a proper housewife one day," as she pushed food around her plate during supper. I am dreading all these late hours. In order to reassure her that she would soon be able to stop, her dad would simply pat her hand and smile. Plus, he delivered on his word. My dad's business took off when I was 9 years old. We were out of this gorgeous 2-story house in one of the best neighborhoods in town in no time at all after he secured multiple large contracts. I had a spacious and light-filled room all to myself, with windows that overlooked our backyard. The decor was my wildest fantasy. Walls painted a pastel purple, string lights shone everywhere, and a gigantic bookshelf that Dad had made himself. He worked on it all weekend, whispering curse words when he thought I wasn't listening, but then bursting with pride when he finished. Following our move, Mom finally did what she had always desired and left her job. However, contrary to her stated intention, she was rarely home to tend to the house. Lunch with the girls, just a quick shopping trip, or my salon appointment ran late were the usual excuses. Despite his busy schedule with his business, my dad always made time for me, so I guess he didn't mind. He would listen attentively as I recounted my experiences at school and with my friends, treating them as if they were the most vital matters in the universe, and every Sunday we would go out for ice cream. It was right before my 11th birthday that we last had ice cream. On this sunny spring day, my dad was filling me in on the news that one of his drivers had called in sick. "I suppose I'll have to go for a run tomorrow by myself," he remarked, completing his cone. "The same as before. Would you let me tag along?" With anticipation building for a road trip with Dad, I inquired. He fluffed my hair while laughing. "Not at this moment, my lady. This is merely an overnight excursion. You won't even notice when I return." That night, before I went to sleep, I embraced him even more tightly than usual. I spoke those words to my dad, "Love you, Dad," without realizing it would be my final goodbye. He departed before the sun came up the following day. Our nanny Maria prepared him coffee and packed his lunch as Mom was still asleep. He backed out of the driveway, and I could hear him start up his vehicle. My father and I had our final face-to-face encounter at that point. At 3:47 in the morning, the phone rang. The fact that I was wide awake and unable to fall asleep because of an odd sensation in my stomach proves it. From her bedroom, I could hear Mom screaming, and then I heard something crack, most likely her nightstand light. Maria cradled me close as my mother paced restlessly, spoke on the phone, and the hours that followed are a haze in my memory. We were visited by police officers in our living room. Dark butterflies swooped over me while words like "died instantly" and "massive collision" swam about. The lorry that jackknifed its way across the highway was involved in an accident with Dad's truck. As if it would somehow ameliorate the situation, they asserted that he did not endure pain. However, it remained unchanged. There was no way to restore my father's memory. To be honest, I don't remember much of the funeral. It was hard for me to believe that Dad was within the closed coffin when I stared at it. Mom really went all out, crying, and even threw herself over the coffin at one point. At 11 years old, I believed it was the only way adults dealt with loss. Now that I'm older, I see how dramatic it all was. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia were initially introduced to me at the funeral. Uncle Robert possessed Dad's eyes, the same kind with crinkly corners that appeared when he attempted to smile at me while crying, despite their seeming lack of familiarity with one another. "Helen," he muttered as he knelt down to my height, "my father was your paternal uncle. I'm really sorry this is how we're meeting." "I don't know why we haven't met before," I asked, being as forthright as any child can be. His features were cast into shade. "There was an argument between your dad and me a long time ago. Nevertheless, at this moment, it makes no difference. My little brother needed me to come and say farewell." Like morning dew, Mom's sorrow vanished after the funeral. In a matter of weeks, she had met with Dad's solicitors, assumed leadership of his company, and seemed to be an expert in transportation business management. Concepts like restructuring and modernization began to slip her lips, but it was clear that she was merely winging it. When my mom would return from posh places with her bags full of expensive items, Maria would saddeningly shake her head, and I would spend most of my time with her. As I was packing my lunch one day, Maria mumbled something about how my mom spends money like water. "Those drivers haven't received their due pay for weeks." She had a point. Employees of Dad's began to resign one by one. They were long-term employees, some of whom had been with him from the start. Their faces, names, and the tiny gifts they would bring me from their journeys were all etched in my memory. After making empty promises and lame reasons, they finally decided to go, leaving their families hungry. After Dad passed away 6 months ago, Mom sold off his business for a fraction of its original value. She pretended to have made a wise financial choice, but in reality, she had destroyed Dad's life's work. I spent a lot of time with Maria as Mom was always gone when Dad's business was sold. Because she thought it might be useful down the road, she began teaching me Spanish. It was preferable than returning home to a bare house, so I made good use of my after-school library time. Late at night, Mom would swoop in, occasionally with the scent of champagne, and hardly notice that I was there. "Oh, you're very much alive," she would remark, as if taken aback to see me at my own residence. After that, she would go back to her room, and I wouldn't have any further contact with her until the following night, if that. Following that Sunday night came. My mom came bursting in the door, laughing like a teenager as I was in the kitchen doing my homework. There were others. "Helen, my darling," she said, her voice burning with an air of artificial excitement, "join me in meeting Richard." Despite his height, Richard sported an expensive suit that gave off an air of cheapness. When he stared directly at me, not even a grin could reach his eyes. "Helen," Mom said, her grip on Richard's arm, reassuring him, "last weekend Richard and I tied the knot. You have a new father figure. Once again, we will behave like a normal family." There was a proper family for me already. "I already have a father," I whispered, my voice quivering. A false grin faded from Richard's face. "Listen up, young lady," he remarked with an air of seriousness. "My mother and I have just tied the knot. You should just take it in stride and be respectful." "You're not the father I knew," retching ensued. "There's no way you can ever be my dad." "Can you grasp my point?" Richard addressed Mom. "Discipline is necessary for a challenging youngster." It was only the beginning, though, when Richard moved in. His 12-year-old niece, Madison, his sister, Janet, and mother, Gloria, had all moved in within a week as well. They rearranged furniture and changed the design that Mom and Dad had chosen together, like an invasion force taking over the house. Mom seems unconcerned. After spending countless hours together shopping and chatting, she and Janet quickly became best friends. Before Mom fired Maria, Gloria seized control of the kitchen and made numerous complaints about her food. In that house, I met my sole remaining caretaker. The last strike followed. Upon my return from school one day, I saw Madison in my room, the one that Dad had constructed, along with the bookcase he had fashioned, the walls painted purple, and the fairy lights. Asking, "What are you up to?" That was my requirement. "Could have this room," Aunt Sarah remarked. Madison replied with a mischievous grin. "I require more space for all my belongings, and this room is larger than the guest room." "Then leave." My voice erupted into a stomp. "The room belongs to me." "Not any more," she mocked, hurling my books from their shelf. "According to your mom, you're relocating to the cozy room down the hall." My mind went blank. In a flurry of limbs and arms, Madison and I both fell after my lunge. She swatted at my face as I tugged at her hair, and we both screamed. We were separated as Richard and Mom sprinted in. "Call out to Helen." "Mom," she yelled, "you are very bold. Immediately proceed to your new room." "Oh no, look at my room. The gift came from my dad." Richard firmly grasped my arm. "Your father is dead," he said with a scowl. "You will obey my every command because this is my house now." For 2 days, they confined me to the tiny guest room, allowing me just to go out for school and toilet breaks. As I turned the corner, I saw my books and belongings arranged in boxes. The rubbish included Dad's bookshelves. As if nothing were amiss, I could make out Mom and Janet downstairs laughing and Madison's music playing in my old room through the wall. Some weeks subsequent to the occurrence in the room, I was making my way to the loo in the middle of the night when I perceived noises coming from downstairs. Keeping hidden in the shadows, I skulked to the top of the stairs. "The girl is getting more challenging by the day," Richard remarked. "Our family's tranquility is being disturbed by her. Would you think about getting her a new place to live?" My pulse plummeted. A different house? Adoption? You ask. My blood froze at how thoughtful Mom sounded when she asked. "It might be possible," Janet said. "To be honest, she doesn't belong here anymore, and Madison is terrified of her because of that attack." After that, I sprinted back to my room where I hid my head in my pillow and convinced myself they weren't being serious. Never would my mom sell me, not at all. Convincing myself that it was all just small talk, I ignored the topic for the time being. My 13th birthday came 2 months after that. Since my father passed away, we had not celebrated my birthdays, so I wasn't anticipating anything. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia surprised me by showing up at the door. As he embraced me tightly, Uncle Robert wished me a happy birthday, Helen. Richard strode past us, and his pupils constricted as he paid us no mind. Mom likely felt ashamed that Dad's brother could judge her, so she hurriedly put together dinner. The knife-edge tension surrounding the table was palpable. After that, Mom coughed. "In fact, Robert and Patricia, I'm delighted to have you here. I have some business to take care of." I felt my gut knot up because of her tone. While avoiding eye contact with me, Mom went on to say, "Helen isn't happy here, and frankly, we're not happy either. With our new family dynamic, she doesn't belong. It has been my decision to place her for adoption." Like a punch in the stomach, the words landed on me. It turned out that the discussion I had overheard wasn't mere idle chatter. "I was thinking you might want to take her since you and Patricia don't have any children of your own," Mom said, her voice as casual as if she were talking about the weather. "In that case, I will begin seeking out other families." Chaos ensued as the room whirled about. I was gasping for air. I was being given away by her on my birthday, the day I was born. Uncle Robert's chair slid back so forcefully that it toppled over. He roared, "We'll take her," his rage visible on his crimson face. "Sarah, I have never seen a more repulsive mother than you. Would you dare?" Richard got to his feet, but a glance at Uncle Robert sent him tumbling back into his seat. "Patricia, I need your help packing Helen's belongings," Uncle Robert stated with a kinder tone. "Right now, we're going." As I trembled, Aunt Patricia took hold of my shoulders and escorted me upstairs. My clothes and the few belongings I had left were tossed into bags as we hurriedly packed. I could barely see because I was crying so hard. "My darling, everything will be all right," Aunt Patricia whispered repeatedly. "We're on top of you now." I didn't even bother to look back at Mom when I left that house. She made no effort to wave me off or even say goodbye. As soon as Uncle Robert rolled down the window of the automobile, Madison's voice asked if she might use my room as well. At first, the change seemed challenging. There were times when I would be temporarily disoriented upon waking up in my new room at Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia's residence. However, the scent of Aunt Patricia's cooking would entice me back to my true home, where the aroma of bacon and coffee wafted up from the kitchen. Rapid action was taken in the adoption process. Without hesitation, Mom signed away her rights, which was painful at the moment, but felt like a godsend in the end. The legal transformation of Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia into Mom and Dad solidified my deepest feelings about them. Uncle Robert informed Helen over breakfast one morning, "We registered you at Riverside Prep. We hope you'll enjoy it here more than your previous school." That place was nice. When I was no longer burdened by the stresses of my previous family life, I began to excel academically. Both my former and current educators and parents took note. They were present at every single parent-teacher conference, academic awards ceremony, and school performance. Upon my enrollment in the debate club, they patiently endured each competition, their expressions of pride evident even in my defeats. They pushed me to broaden my horizons by enrolling me in piano lessons, scientific camps over the summer, and animal shelter volunteer work. They were there to back it all, both monetarily and emotionally. Over time, the numbness of my mother's rejection gave way to the comforting assurance of being genuinely loved. I ceased to consider her, to ponder whether she ever considered me. The joy and abundance of my new existence had made the past hurts irrelevant. At my high school graduation, not only did Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia yell loudest for me, but their entire extended family cheered as well. They had taken me in as one of their own. During my graduation meal, Aunt Patricia said, "We have something to tell you. Your college fund has been in the works since the day you moved in with us." They had saved up enough to pay for my tuition at any school I wanted. I intend to study investment management at State University's business school. It was amazing at college. With the goal of bringing them great joy, I dove headfirst into my studies. Aunt Patricia casually brought up the fact that she had encountered my biological mother at the supermarket while I was an intern at Goldman Sachs in my sophomore year. "She has a son now," Aunt Patricia observed with discernment, observing my reaction. "Richard's family still has them in your father's old house." Surprisingly, I felt nothing more than mild curiosity, so I simply nodded. Now that it was happening to someone else, that life felt like a faraway dream. I was hired by Morgan Stanley after finishing college. My eyes popped when I saw my starting pay. I never in a million years thought I'd be making that much money straight out of college. I skipped lunch and headed straight to the jewelry store the day I received my first paycheck. Aunt Patricia had her sights set on a certain pearl necklace displayed in a nearby store window, while Uncle Robert had been donning the same old watch for years. Aunt Patricia began to cry as I presented her with her gifts, and Uncle Robert's fingers trembled as he placed on his brand-new watch. "Your money was better spent elsewhere," he pleaded feebly. What else could I buy with that money? As I embraced them both, I inquired, "You've been my parents. You're the driving force behind this whole thing." It was only 6 years ago. I worked my way up the corporate ladder at Morgan Stanley after finishing college, eventually leading a staff of my own. I no longer hesitated to call my parents Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia, which made every achievement seem even better because I could tell them about it. First, there was the apartment, a lovely 2-bedroom condo in a desirable area of town. Mom helped me decorate it, and Dad insisted on checking all the paperwork before I signed the mortgage. Then I met Michael. A year of dating, and he proposed during a weekend trip to the beach. I said yes before he even finished asking the question. Mom cried when we told them, and Dad pulled Michael into a bear hug. "Welcome to the family, son," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. We threw ourselves into wedding planning. Mom and I spent weekends looking at venues and tasting cakes, while Dad and Michael bonded over budget spreadsheets and vendor contracts. Then the message arrived on Facebook. "Helen, sweetheart, I've heard about your upcoming wedding. I know it's been a long time, but I'm still your mother. I've changed, and I want to make things right. Please let me be part of your special day. I miss you so much." My hand shook as I read the message. I immediately called Mom. "I saw Sarah yesterday," Mom said quietly when I told her about the message. "At the grocery store. She didn't ask about you. Not once. But when I mentioned how successful you've become, how you're getting married, well, her eyes lit up in a way I didn't like." Mom hesitated before continuing. "There's more. That niece of her husband's, Madison, she got pregnant, married some deadbeat, and moved back into the house with her husband. The whole family is constantly fighting. Sarah was complaining about money problems rather loudly in the middle of the store. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. So that's why she reached out. She needs money." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as memories flooded back. The room she gave away, the birthday she threw me away, the years of silence when she had every opportunity to reach out, but didn't. Finally, I typed, "Sarah, let me be clear. You are not my mother. You lost that right when you gave me away on my 13th birthday. I have parents who love me unconditionally, something you never managed to do. I don't want you at my wedding. I don't want you in my life. Don't contact me again." I hit send, then immediately blocked her. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd finally put down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. The morning of my wedding dawned perfect and clear. Michael's parents had rented the Mason Creek estate for the ceremony, a beautiful historic property with sprawling gardens and a restored Victorian mansion. I was in the bridal suite with Mom, putting the finishing touches on my makeup when there was a knock at the door. Miss Anderson, one of the security guards, looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation at the front gate. There are some people insisting they know you. A man, a woman, and a teenage boy." My stomach dropped. Somehow I knew exactly who it was. "I'll handle this," I said, standing up carefully in my wedding dress. "Helen, you don't have to." Mom started, but I shook my head. "Yes, I do. Once and for all." I walked to the front gates, my wedding heels clicking against the cobblestone path. And there they were, Sarah, Richard, and a boy who must have been my half-brother, though he looked exactly like Madison. "Helen," Sarah screamed when she saw me, grabbing the iron bars of the gate. "How dare you not invite your own mother to your wedding? Let us in immediately." I took a moment to really look at her. She aged poorly. Her designer clothes were obviously last season's, her makeup too heavy, her hair desperately in need of a touch-up. Richard looked thinner, more haggard, the expensive suit replaced by something off the rack. "Richard should be the one walking you down the aisle," Sarah continued, her voice shrill. "He's your father." That made me laugh, a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed across the courtyard. "My father? The man who locked me in a room for 2 days? The man who helped you throw away your own daughter? We're family." Sarah's voice cracked. "You can't just pretend we don't exist. Look at how you're living. This fancy wedding, your big job, your expensive clothes. Meanwhile, we can barely make ends meet. We're drowning in debt, and you're here playing princess." Ah, there it was. The real reason for this dramatic scene. "I'm not playing at anything," I said coldly. "I worked for everything I have, and let's be clear, you're not my family. You gave up that right years ago. My parents are inside that house. They're the ones who raised me, supported me, loved me unconditionally. You need our help." Sarah was practically foaming at the mouth now. "After everything we did for you. Everything you did for me? I cut her off. You mean throwing me away like garbage? Taking away my room, my home, my childhood. That's what you did for me. I turned to the security guards. These people are strangers who are trespassing. Please remove them from the property. They are not welcome here. You can't do this. Sarah screamed as the guards moved forward. On your mother. No, I said firmly. You're just the woman who gave birth to me. There's a difference. I turned my back on her continued screams and walked away, my head held high. When I returned to the bridal suite, Mom was waiting with a worried expression. Are you okay, sweetheart? I took a deep breath and smiled. You know what? I've never been better. That chapter of my life is finally completely closed. There was a knock at the door, and Dad poked his head in. Ready, princess. I looked in the mirror one last time, adjusting my veil. The terrified 13-year-old kid wasn't the same lady staring back at me. I was powerful, accomplished, and loved, really loved. As I took Dad's arm, I declared, I'm ready. As we made our way to the outside ceremony, the wedding march started playing. Michael, who was visibly moved, was standing at the altar, looking down at me with a tear in his eye. As Dad led me down the aisle, all of our guests rose to their feet and turned to observe. This was the right choice. The man who gave me my driver's license, assisted me with my college applications, and demonstrated the true meaning of a father's love was the one proposing to me. The ceremony was absolutely right. Under a clear blue sky with the affection of our loved ones by our sides, Michael and I exchanged our vows in a beautiful garden. Our guests went wild with cheers as he kissed me as my husband for the first time. The party continued late into the night. My dad made everyone laugh with anecdotes from my undergraduate days after giving a moving speech that made everyone cry. As I danced with Dad, I couldn't help but smile as Mom danced with Michael. Those 6 months had passed. After Michael and I returned from our honeymoon in Greece, we found a delightful new normal in life. If someone were to ask me about my biological parents, I would honestly say that they are the ones who selected me, loved me, and helped mold me into who I am now. After the wedding, I couldn't care less about Sarah and her family's fate. Their decision to sell Dad's old house was heard through the grapevine, but I no longer care about that. My life has moved on from that phase. I didn't experience abandonment or betrayal in my journey. It's about connecting with the people that love you genuinely, not out of obligation, but affection. The message is to prioritize joy above sadness, to let go of grudges rather than hold on to them, and to keep moving ahead rather than dwelling on the past. I am overjoyed with how things worked out. My name is now Helen Anderson Mitchell. There is a man who loves me with all his heart and wakes up beside me every morning. Also, I still get to eat Sunday supper with my parents, who choose me and have never let me go.
This story is titled, Daughter Proudly Cheated with Her Sister's Husband, Now Begs Us to Take Her In After He Cheated and Dumped Her. Hey everyone, we put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what we do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey Reddit, I honestly never thought I'd be sharing something like this here, but I don't even know where else to turn. My family has been through so much over the last few years, and I still can't fully wrap my head around everything that's happened. I just need to get this out because maybe writing it all down will help me process it better. Also, I could really use some advice, or even just an outside perspective. So, I guess I'll start from the beginning. I'm a 48-year-old mom of 3 kids. Sarah, 27 female, Emily, 25 female, and Alex, 21 male. My husband, 53 male, and I have been married for nearly 3 decades. Up until a few years ago, I really thought we had a solid, happy family. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? Looking back now, I can't believe how naive I was. This all started about 3 years ago. At the time, Sarah was married to Jake, then 28 male. They'd been together for years and seemed like one of those couples who had it all figured out. I loved Jake like my own son, and Sarah seemed genuinely happy with him. But everything fell apart in the worst way possible. Around that time, Sarah went through something incredibly traumatic. I don't want to share too many details because it's her story, not mine, but let's just say it was the kind of thing that changes a person forever. She was struggling to cope, and I could see it in everything she did. Her eyes were always red from crying, she jumped at every little noise, and she started isolating herself from everyone, even her family. It was heartbreaking to watch, and I felt so helpless. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, we found out that Jake had been cheating on Sarah with her younger sister Emily. I can't even describe the moment I found out. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest and stomped on it. The worst part was that I didn't even hear it from Emily or Jake. I found out from Sarah after she caught them. Sarah was completely crushed. I've never seen her like that in my entire life, and I pray to God I never do again. When I confronted Emily about it, I expected tears, apologies, maybe even an attempt at explaining herself. But instead, she just shrugged and said, "Well, someone had to take care of Jake since Sarah wasn't." I was stunned. She said it so casually, like it was no big deal. I couldn't believe my own daughter was capable of saying something so cruel. I was so angry that I had to leave the room before I did something I'd regret. That was the moment I decided I couldn't have Emily in my life. Not until she understood the gravity of what she'd done. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that she needed to stay away from me, her father, and most importantly, Sarah. At first, she tried to argue, but when she saw I wasn't budging, she started screaming. She said things like, "You're choosing Sarah over me," and "You're such a hypocrite." But honestly, her words didn't mean anything to me in that moment. I was done. Meanwhile, Sarah was barely holding on. She blamed herself for everything. Jake's infidelity, the fallout with her sister, even the traumatic event that had happened to her. No matter how many times I told her it wasn't her fault, she just couldn't believe it. She kept saying, "Maybe if I had been a better wife, this wouldn't have happened." It broke my heart every time. We ended up getting Sarah into therapy, which was probably the best decision we made during that time. At first, she was hesitant to go, but over time, she started to open up. Therapy didn't fix everything overnight, but it gave her the tools she needed to start healing. Slowly but surely, she began to find herself again. She even started going out with friends and pursuing hobbies she'd given up on. Seeing her smile again, after everything she'd been through, was like a breath of fresh air. Emily, on the other hand, didn't seem to have any remorse for what she'd done. After Sarah and Jake finalized their divorce, Emily and Jake went public with their relationship. They didn't even try to be discreet about it. They posted pictures together on social media, went on trips, and acted like nothing had happened. It was infuriating to say the least. Then came the ultimate slap in the face. Emily and Jake announced their engagement. I found out through Alex, who called me in disbelief after seeing their engagement party photos online. Emily had the audacity to ask me and my husband to come to the wedding. I was appalled. I told her straight up that I couldn't support their relationship and that I wouldn't be attending. My husband felt the same way. Emily tried to argue, saying things like, "You're being so unfair," and "Jake loves me, Mom. Why can't you just be happy for me?" But I wasn't having it. I also gave her a warning, which I still stand by to this day. If Jake cheated with you, he'll cheat on you. It's only a matter of time. She didn't take that well, but honestly, I didn't care. My priority was, and still is, protecting Sarah. Looking back on that time, I can't believe how much our family changed in such a short period. What once felt like a strong, unbreakable bond was completely shattered. I barely recognized Emily anymore, and my relationship with her hasn't been the same since. As much as it hurts to say, I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive her for what she did to Sarah. At the same time, she's still my daughter, and part of me wants to believe she can change, but I'm not holding my breath. After cutting contact with Emily following the fallout, I honestly thought things couldn't get worse. I mean, how much more damage could she do, right? Well, I underestimated just how deep her selfishness ran. For a while, she stayed quiet. She didn't reach out to me or her dad, which was honestly a relief. But life didn't stay peaceful for long. One day, Alex, my youngest, came storming into the house with his phone in his hand. I'll never forget the look on his face. It was this mix of anger and disbelief. He handed me his phone and said, "Have you seen this?" I looked down and saw a photo of Emily and Jake, arms wrapped around each other, all smiles. But that wasn't the worst part. In the caption, Emily had written, "He put a ring on it. Forever love." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They were engaged. My daughter was engaged to the man who had not only betrayed her sister, but also contributed to the lowest point in her life. It felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just the engagement itself. It was the way they flaunted it. They didn't seem to care how it would affect anyone else, especially Sarah. I wasn't sure how to break the news to Sarah. She was finally starting to make progress in therapy, and I didn't want to undo all that by bringing this up. But at the same time, I knew she'd find out eventually, and I didn't want her to feel blindsided. So, I sat her down and told her as gently as I could. Her face fell immediately, and she just sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, she said, I knew they were together, but I didn't think they'd actually take it this far. She didn't cry, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. It was like she'd been stabbed all over again. After that, I decided to reach out to Emily. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but I felt like I needed to say something. If not for my sake, then for Sarah's. I called her, and surprisingly, she picked up. I told her how hurtful her actions were, and that getting engaged to Jake was just pouring salt in the wound. Her response? Mom, you just don't understand. Jake and I are in love. What Sarah and Jake had is over. Why can't you just be happy for me? Happy for her? Couldn't believe she had the nerve to say that. I told her in no uncertain terms that I would not support her relationship with Jake. I also warned her, again, that if Jake could cheat on Sarah, he could just as easily cheat on her. She laughed it off, saying, Jake's a different person with me. You'll see. That was the last time we spoke for a while. Then came the engagement party. No, I didn't go. Let's get that out of the way. But Alex did. He said he didn't want to support them, but he was curious to see how it would all play out. Apparently, the party was everything you'd expect from Emily and Jake. Flashy, over the top, and completely devoid of self-awareness. They even had the audacity to post photos on social media with captions like, True love wins, and can't wait to spend forever with you. The comment section was a mess. Some people congratulated them, but others called them out for their terrible behavior. It was a circus. Alex also told me that some of the extended family showed up, which was surprising. I later found out that most of them didn't know the full story. They thought Emily and Jake had gotten together after the divorce, not during Sarah and Jake's marriage. When the truth came out, a lot of them were furious. One of my sisters even called me to apologize for attending, saying she had no idea what Emily had done. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying her best to move on. She stopped following Emily and Jake on social media, and she asked us not to mention them around her. I respected her wishes, but it was hard to avoid the topic entirely, especially with Alex constantly updating me on their antics. He was just as angry as I was, if not more. He kept saying things like, how can she not see how wrong this is? And Jake's such a scumbag. I don't know how she can stand him. As for my husband, he stayed quiet for the most part. He's always been the calm, steady one in our relationship, but I could tell he was just as upset as I was. One night, after a particularly rough day, he sat down next to me and said, I don't know where we went wrong with Emily. I thought we raised her better than this. That hit me hard. I'd been asking myself the same question, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel so much more real. The engagement eventually turned into wedding planning. I tried to tune it out as much as possible, but Emily kept finding ways to involve me, even though I'd made my stance clear. She'd send me text messages with things like, Mom, do you want to help me pick out a dress? Or, we're looking at venues next weekend. Want to come? Each time I replied with a polite but firm no. I thought she'd get the hint, but she didn't. Then, out of nowhere, she called me one evening. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She sounded so excited and said, Mom, I really want you and Dad to walk me down the aisle. It would mean so much to me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, as gently as I could, that we couldn't support her wedding, not because we didn't love her, but because of everything that had happened. She started crying and said, You're choosing Sarah over me again. Why can't you just let this go? That broke my heart, but I stood my ground. I told her this wasn't about choosing one daughter over the other. It was about doing what was right. That conversation ended with her hanging up on me, and I haven't heard from her since. Honestly, I'm okay with that. As much as I miss the Emily I used to know, I can't let her actions go unchecked. She needs to understand that her choices have consequences. After the fiasco with the engagement party and Emily's increasingly tone-deaf attempts to involve us in her wedding plans, things went eerily quiet. I didn't hear from Emily, Jake, or even much from the extended family. To be honest, I thought maybe they had finally accepted our stance and decided to move on without us. It was bittersweet. On one hand, it felt like a relief not to deal with the drama, but on the other, I couldn't shake the sadness of knowing how fractured our family had become. Sarah was doing her best to heal, but I could see how much this situation was still weighing on her. She had started setting boundaries with the family, avoiding gatherings where she thought Emily or Jake might show up. One time, we had a small family barbecue planned, and she specifically asked, Are they going to be there? I assured her they weren't invited, but the fact that she even had to ask broke my heart. She should have been able to feel safe with her own family, but instead, she was constantly on edge. One night, Sarah and I were sitting in the living room, and she opened up to me about how she really felt. Mom, I don't think I'll ever forgive her, she said, staring at the floor. Not just for Jake, but for the way she treated me when I was at my lowest. She didn't just betray me, she enjoyed it. She didn't care what it did to me. Hearing her say that was like a knife to the heart. I didn't know how to respond because honestly, I couldn't blame her. Emily's actions had been so callous, and she had shown no remorse. Around this time, Alex started pulling away from Emily too. He had been furious about her actions from the start, but he'd still kept in touch with her, mostly out of a sense of obligation. But one day he came to me and said, Mom, I can't do it anymore. Every time I talk to her, she acts like she's the victim in all this. I'm sick of it. He stopped answering her calls and unfollowed her on social media. I think that was the wake-up call Emily needed, because not long after, she started reaching out to me again. At first, it was just small things. Texts asking how we were doing or updates about the wedding. I kept my responses short and polite, but didn't engage much. Then, out of nowhere, she sent me this long message about how much she missed our family and how hard it was to plan a wedding without her parents' support. She even said something along the lines of, I know I've made mistakes, but can't we just move forward? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Finally, I wrote back, Emily, I love you, but you need to take responsibility for the pain you've caused before we can even think about moving forward. Her reply was immediate and defensive. She said she had nothing to apologize for because she and Jake were meant to be, and that if Sarah couldn't handle that, it wasn't her fault. I didn't respond after that. I didn't see the point. A few months passed, and Emily and Jake got married in what I assume was a beautiful ceremony, though I wouldn't know because, of course, we didn't attend. I heard through the grapevine that some family members who did go felt awkward the entire time. One of my cousins even texted me afterward to say, it felt like everyone was pretending not to notice the elephant in the room. I wish I'd stayed home. After the wedding, things went quiet again. Emily didn't contact us, and honestly, I thought maybe she'd finally moved on. Sarah started to seem a little lighter, too. She was going out more, laughing more. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I started to feel hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we could put this whole mess behind us. But then, out of nowhere, Emily showed up at my doorstep. It was a rainy evening, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I heard a frantic knock at the door. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor needing something, but when I opened the door, there was Emily, soaking wet, crying, and holding a baby and a toddler. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. She just stood there, looking completely defeated, and finally said, Mom, I need your help. I let her in, of course. As angry as I was at her, I couldn't turn her away, not with the kids there. She sat on the couch, still sobbing, while I got her a towel and tried to calm her down. Once she finally caught her breath, she started telling me what had happened. Apparently, Jake had been emotionally and verbally abusive for months. He'd been controlling, constantly putting her down, and even had another woman on the side. He has a whole other family, Mom, she said through tears. I can't go back there. I just can't. Hearing her say that stirred up so many emotions. On one hand, I felt for her. No one deserves to be treated like that. But on the other hand, I couldn't help thinking, you chose this. You knew who he was, and you still chose him over your sister, over your family. It was a hard thing to reconcile. Emily begged me to let her and the kids stay with us. She said she had nowhere else to go and didn't know what to do. I told her I needed time to think about it. I didn't want to make any rash decisions, especially knowing how this might affect Sarah. After everything Sarah had been through, I couldn't risk doing anything that might set her back. That night, I told my husband what had happened. He was just as conflicted as I was. We can't just turn her away, he said, but we also can't ignore how much she's hurt Sarah. It felt like we were stuck between a rock and a hard place. No matter what we decided, someone was going to get hurt. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying everything in my head: Emily's betrayal, Sarah's pain, Jake's predictably awful behavior. I didn't know what the right thing to do was, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision I made, it had to be for the good of the family as a whole. Not just for Emily, not just for Sarah, but for everyone. After Emily showed up at my door with her kids, my life was thrown into chaos yet again. I spent most of that first night sitting up in the living room, staring at her sleeping on the couch with her baby in her arms. The toddler was curled up on the floor beside her, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal. It was such a stark contrast to the confident, even smug version of Emily I'd seen over the past few years. She looked fragile, broken even, and I didn't know what to make of it. When morning came, I decided I couldn't put off the conversation any longer. I gently woke her up and handed her a cup of coffee. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded, looking like she knew it was coming. I asked her to tell me everything, how she ended up in this situation, why she came to me, what she wanted me to do. Emily told me that things with Jake had started falling apart not long after they got married. She said he'd become controlling, monitoring her phone, and criticizing her constantly. She tried to brush it off at first, thinking it was just stress or maybe some growing pains as they adjusted to married life. But then he started disappearing for long stretches of time, and she began to suspect he was cheating. It wasn't until she found texts and photos on his phone
quietly
that her suspicions
letting her
were
get it all
confirmed.
out. He's
Part
been
of me
seeing
wanted
this
to
woman
say,
for over a year,
"What did you
she
expect?"
said,
but I
her
bit
voice
my
trembling.
tongue. I
They
knew
have a
she
baby
didn't need a
together.
lecture. Not yet, anyway. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I know I've messed up, Mom, but I don't have anyone else to turn to." That's when the guilt started creeping in. As much as I hated what Emily had done, she was still my daughter. And those kids, my grandkids, were innocent in all of this. I told her I needed time to think about it, and I wasn't making any promises. She nodded and said she understood, but I could tell she was disappointed. I decided the next step was to talk to Sarah. I couldn't make a decision about Emily without considering how it would affect her. That afternoon, I called her and asked if she could come over. She sounded hesitant, but agreed. When Sarah arrived, she immediately noticed Emily's things in the hallway. Her face fell, and I knew this conversation was going to be harder than I thought. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I told her about Emily's troubles with Jake and how she'd shown up at our door with nowhere else to go. Sarah listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I get that you want to help her, but you have to understand. I can't be around her. Not after everything she's done. I've worked so hard to move on, and I can't go backward." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew she was right. Emily's presence in our home would reopen wounds that Sarah had spent years trying to heal. But at the same time, I couldn't just abandon Emily and her kids. I felt like I was being forced to choose between my daughters, and it was tearing me apart. My husband was just as conflicted as I was. That evening, we sat down to talk about it, and he said, "I don't think there's a right answer here. No matter what we do, someone's going to get hurt." He suggested we look into alternative solutions, maybe helping Emily find a place to stay nearby so she wouldn't be in the house, but would still have support. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it felt like the best compromise we could come up with. The next day, I told Emily about our decision. I explained that while we couldn't have her staying with us, we would help her find an apartment and cover the first month's rent. I also offered to help with daycare for the kids so she could look for a job. I expected her to be grateful, or at least understanding, but instead, she got angry. "This is my family," she yelled. "How can you just turn me away like this? After everything I've been through?" I tried to stay calm and explained that it wasn't about turning her away. It was about protecting Sarah's mental health, but she wasn't having it. "Sarah needs to get over it," she snapped. "It's been years. How much longer are you going to coddle her?" That was the moment my husband lost his temper. He stood up and said, "Don't you dare talk about your sister like that. Do you even realize how much pain you've caused her? You're lucky we're even willing to help you at all." Emily burst into tears and ran out of the room, leaving me and my husband sitting there in silence. Over the next few days, I tried to smooth things over with Emily. I found a one-bedroom apartment for her and helped her get in touch with a lawyer to start the divorce process. But she remained distant and cold, barely speaking to me unless it was absolutely necessary. It was clear she felt betrayed, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She was finally facing the consequences of her actions, and while it was painful to watch, I knew it was necessary. As for Sarah, I made a point to check in with her regularly and reassure her that she was my priority. She seemed relieved when I told her Emily wouldn't be staying with us, but I could tell the whole situation was still weighing on her. "I just want things to go back to how they used to be," she said one day. "But I know they never will." She was right. No matter what I did, our family would never be the same. But I had to believe that we could find a way to move forward. Maybe not as the happy, united family we once were, but as something new. Something that worked for everyone. Once Emily moved into the small apartment my husband and I helped her secure, I thought things might settle down. It wasn't ideal, far from it, but it seemed like a step forward. At least she had a roof over her head and a place to regroup. We also paid for a couple of weeks of daycare for the kids so she could start job hunting. It was the best we could do under the circumstances, especially since tensions were still high between her and the rest of the family. But things didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. Emily wasn't exactly grateful for the help. In fact, she seemed to resent it. She kept complaining about the size of the apartment, the lack of amenities, the area. Not unsafe, but definitely not luxurious. I tried to remind her that it was temporary, that she needed to focus on rebuilding her life, but she wasn't having it. "I can't live like this, Mom," she said during one of our phone calls. "I have 2 kids. They deserve better than this." I bit my tongue, wanting to say, they deserve better than Jake, too. But here we are. Instead, I calmly reminded her that this was a starting point, not a permanent situation. "You're going to have to put in the work," I said. "This isn't going to fix itself overnight." The job hunt wasn't going well either. Emily hadn't worked in years, and her resume was practically empty. She applied to a few places, mostly retail and customer service jobs, but she didn't seem motivated to follow up. "They're not going to hire me," she said one day, almost as if she'd already decided it was a lost cause. It was frustrating to see her so defeated, especially knowing that she had no choice but to make it work. But no matter how much I tried to encourage her, it felt like my words were falling on deaf ears. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was still reeling from her sudden reappearance. Word had spread that Emily was back in town and staying in an apartment we'd helped her find. Some of my siblings called to voice their opinions, most of them negative. "After what she did to Sarah, you're still helping her?" one of them said. "You're enabling her. You know that, right?" I hated hearing it, but I understood where they were coming from. From the outside, it probably looked like I was rewarding Emily's bad behavior. But I couldn't bring myself to turn my back on her entirely, especially when there were 2 innocent kids involved. I had to remind myself that helping her didn't mean I condoned her actions. It just meant I wasn't willing to let her hit rock bottom with no safety net. As for Sarah, she was keeping her distance. We hadn't told her the full details of how we were helping Emily, only that Emily wasn't staying with us. I didn't want to burden her with more than she needed to know, but I also didn't want her to feel blindsided if she ran into Emily somewhere. So one day, I brought it up gently. "Emily's staying in an apartment across town," I said. "We helped her with the first month's rent, but she's on her own after that." Sarah nodded, her face unreadable. "I figured you'd do something like that," she said. "It's fine. I just don't want to be involved." Her response was calm, but it felt like there was an undercurrent of hurt. I knew she was trying to be understanding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was putting a strain on our relationship. Then there was Alex. He was furious when he found out we were helping Emily at all. "Why are you bending over backward for her after everything she's done?" he asked one night. "She doesn't deserve it." I tried to explain that it wasn't about what Emily deserved. It was about doing what I felt was right. "Her kids are innocent in all of this," I said. "They need stability, and if we can help provide that, then I think we should." But Alex wasn't convinced. "You're just letting her manipulate you," he said. "She's never going to change if you keep bailing her out." His words stung because deep down, I knew there was some truth to them. But what was the alternative? Letting Emily sink completely? I wasn't sure I could live with that. Emily's struggles began to take a toll on her emotionally. She called me one night in tears, saying she felt like a failure. "I ruined everything," she said. "My marriage, my relationship with Sarah, my whole life. I don't even know who I am anymore." It was the first time she'd shown any real self-awareness, and it caught me off guard. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this was her turning point, but that hope was short-lived. The next time I spoke to her, she was back to blaming everyone but herself. "If Jake hadn't treated me like garbage, I wouldn't be in this mess," she said. "And if Sarah had just forgiven me, maybe things wouldn't be so bad." It was like she couldn't decide whether to take responsibility or play the victim. It was exhausting. At the same time, I was struggling to maintain my own sanity. Between managing Emily's situation, supporting Sarah, and dealing with the fallout from the rest of the family, I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells. I started to question whether I was making the right choices or just digging myself into a deeper hole. The breaking point came when Emily showed up at our house unexpectedly one evening. She looked tired and frazzled, the kids clinging to her legs. "I need to stay here just for a few nights," she said. My heart sank. "Emily, we've been over this," I said. "You can't stay here. It's not fair to Sarah." Her face crumpled and she started crying. "I don't know what else to do," she said. "I'm trying, Mom, but nothing's working. I feel like I'm drowning." I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt, but I held firm. "We'll help you find more resources," I said, "but you can't stay here." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd made the right call. I wanted to believe that tough love was the answer, but part of me worried that I was just pushing Emily further away. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the damage it would do to Sarah if I let Emily move back in. It felt like no matter what I did, I was failing one of my daughters. After that night, when Emily showed up at our house begging to stay, things changed. I could feel the shift, not just with her, but within myself. The guilt that had been weighing on me for weeks didn't go away, but it transformed into something else. Resolve, maybe. I realized I couldn't keep trying to fix everything, to hold together a family that was already fractured. Some things, I decided, had to be left to time. The first step was enforcing boundaries. It wasn't easy. Emily called almost daily, asking for help with this or that. Sometimes it was money, sometimes it was advice, sometimes it was just someone to vent to. But every call left me emotionally drained. I had to start saying no. Emily, you need to figure this out, I told her during one particularly tense phone call. We've done everything we can to help you get back on your feet. Now it's your turn. She didn't take it well. So, that's it? She said. You're just giving up on me? I told her it wasn't about giving up. It was about giving her the chance to stand on her own. She hung up on me, and for a while we didn't speak. During that silence, I focused my energy on rebuilding my relationship with Sarah. She'd been distant ever since Emily re-entered the picture, and I couldn't blame her. I had been so caught up in managing Emily's crisis that I hadn't given enough attention to Sarah's feelings. One evening, I invited her over for dinner, just the two of us. I wanted to create a safe space where she could speak freely. At first, the conversation was light, work, hobbies, her friends. But eventually, the topic shifted to Emily. I don't know how you do it, Mom, Sarah said. After everything she's done, I don't think I'd be able to look at her, let alone help her. Her words weren't bitter. They were honest. She hurt me in ways I can't even explain. And sometimes I feel like she still doesn't get it. I nodded, letting her vent. You're right, I said. She doesn't get it, not fully. And I don't know if she ever will. But I also know she's my daughter. And as much as she's hurt you, and me, I can't just walk away from her. Sarah sighed. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. That conversation marked a turning point for us. While things weren't perfect, it felt like a step toward healing. I promised her I would always prioritize her mental health, and that I wouldn't let Emily's presence disrupt the progress she'd made. It was a promise I intended to keep. Meanwhile, Emily was struggling. The reality of single motherhood had hit her hard, and without Jake's financial support, she was barely scraping by. She eventually found a part-time job at a local grocery store, but it wasn't enough to cover all her expenses. She called me one evening, crying about how hard it was. I feel like a failure, she said. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this. I wanted to tell her that this was the consequence of her choices, but I held back. Instead, I reminded her of the resources I'd given her, programs for single mothers, legal aid for her divorce, even therapy services. You have tools, Emily, I said. You just need to use them. But her pride got in the way. She didn't want to ask for help from anyone but me, and I wasn't willing to be her crutch anymore. It was tough love, but it was necessary. Slowly, she started taking more responsibility. It wasn't a perfect transformation. There were setbacks, moments where she lashed out or fell into old patterns. But it was progress. Alex, on the other hand, had completely cut ties with Emily. He refused to answer her calls or even acknowledge her existence. I don't have time for her drama, he told me when I asked if he'd consider reaching out. She made her bed. Now she has to lie in it. While I didn't agree with his approach, I respected his decision. Everyone had their own way of coping, and this was his. As for the extended family, most of them stayed distant from Emily as well. Some openly voiced their disapproval of her actions, while others simply avoided her altogether. One of my sisters, who had been close to Emily growing up, told me, I love her, but I can't support what she did to Sarah. Maybe someday, but not now. It was a sentiment I heard often, and while it hurt, I understood it. Months turned into a year, and the dust started to settle. Emily eventually moved into a slightly bigger apartment after picking up a second job. She seemed more stable, though the cracks were still there. She didn't talk about Jake much anymore, except to say that the divorce was finalized and he'd moved out of state. Good riddance, she said when she told me. I could tell there was still a lot of anger there, but at least she was starting to move on. Sarah, meanwhile, was thriving. She had a new job she loved, a supportive group of friends, and even started dating someone new, a kind, patient man who treated her the way she deserved to be treated. When she introduced him to me and my husband, I saw something in her I hadn't seen in years. Hope. It was a reminder that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds. As for me, I've learned to accept that my family will never be what it once was. There's no fixing this, not in the way I initially hoped. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward. It just means we have to redefine what moving forward looks like. I still see Emily occasionally, mostly for the sake of the kids. They're beautiful, bright little souls who remind me that, despite all the pain, there's still joy to be found. Sarah hasn't spoken to Emily since the fallout, and I don't push her to. I've learned that healing looks different for everyone, and it's not my place to dictate what that should look like. In the end, I don't know if I made all the right choices. I'm sure there are things I could have handled better, things I should have said or done differently, but I did the best I could with the hand I was dealt, and I think that's all any of us can do. To anyone reading this who's struggling with family issues, know that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to prioritize your own mental health, and it's okay to let go of the idea that things will ever go back to the way they were. Sometimes moving forward means letting go, and that's okay too.
Hey there. I'm Juliana Bridges, a 38-year-old working at an advertising agency. In our little unit, it's me, my husband David, and our 8-year-old daughter Mia. We're not swimming in money, but we do all right. You see, the advertising agency I work for takes care of us pretty nicely. I mean, my paycheck is quite something, especially when you compare it to what others in similar office gigs are getting. Yep, I bring home a pretty hefty salary. I've never had to worry about spending money each month, and we've even been able to save up for Mia's college tuition. Considering the cost of living and our home mortgage, we've always had some extra money left over. David was well aware of my high salary, and perhaps his pride was hurt because a year ago he quit his job and started freelancing in web design. He said he switched to freelancing because his salary job had hidden its pay ceiling, but I was skeptical about how much one could really earn as a freelancer. Of course, I objected when he said he wanted to quit. I thought it would be safer to stay in his job, get his full retirement benefits, and then think about other options. But David was adamant about freelancing, so that's what he did. Ever since he began freelancing, David has been working from home. Maybe his stated reason for quitting his job was just a cover, and he was really tired of the office politics. Either way, I had to get used to a new routine where David was always home when I left for work. At first, Mia seemed happy that her dad was always at home when she came back from school, but lately she seemed somewhat discontented. She probably feels like she's being constantly watched. She's only 8, but Mia is more mature than her classmates. So, our life was going along without any major issues, but I didn't notice that the cracks started appearing when David began working from home. When David started working from home, I asked him if he could help a little with the household chores. "Can you help with things like cleaning and laundry? I'll still cook the meals, like I always have." "Excuse me, why do I have to do housework? You're home more, and you have more free time. It'd be nice if you could help out a bit when you're not too tired." Free. Just because I'm a freelancer doesn't mean I'm not busy. In fact, I've got a lot on my plate. I can't deal with household stuff on top of that. Unbelievable. David just brushed aside my modest request. I understand that freelancing can be more unstable and mentally taxing compared to a regular salary job. That's one reason why I didn't want him to switch in the first place. But household chores are nobody's specific job, and I've been doing them all alone, even though we've both been working. I thought you could share some of the load. But I work too, you know. It should be equal. You've managed everything by yourself up until now. Don't start complaining now. David, who was convinced he was in the right, wouldn't listen to me at all. In the end, I continued to handle all the household chores as usual. I don't assume he's not busy just because he works from home, but whenever I return home late at night, I'd invariably find David sprawled in front of the TV or deeply engrossed in his smartphone. "Is dinner ready?" He'd ask with an air of entitlement which always infuriated me. What's more, since working from home, he seemed to become more concerned about cleanliness, always demanding that I clean the house more thoroughly, pointing out every little piece of dirt on the floor, the windows, and the bathroom. "If you're so concerned, why don't you clean it up yourself? I'm only human. I can't get to everything, I'd reply. You're talking back to me. Clean up your own mess. It's our family's home. It's not like I'm the only one making it dirty. Yet David would go off on these bizarre tangents, and I was utterly baffled by his logic. Mia would quietly listen to our exchanges from a distance. You know, Dad's always glued to his phone. I wish we could go out together on weekends, but Daddy's always busy on his phone, Mia said one Sunday morning as I was preparing breakfast. Apparently, Mia had asked David to go out and play the previous evening, but he'd refused, barely looking up from his phone. That's true. He's always on that phone. He's been like that since before you come home from work. Sometimes he's on calls, too. Calls? Yeah, he always sounds friendly, and I can hear a woman's voice. That's odd. From Mia's account, it didn't seem like David was talking to a client or a colleague. I tried to think of who he could be talking to so frequently. As a freelancer, I was unfamiliar with the world of freelancing, so I didn't know. But the mention of a woman's voice was definitely bothering me. Could he be having an affair? It wasn't unthinkable. He had started working from home only a few months ago, and he now had more free time than when he had a regular job. Trying to not let Mia see my agitation, I focused on preparing breakfast. Several months passed since David started freelancing. He still never helped with any of the household chores, and he began spending whole days away from home during weekends. I have work to do. Freelancers don't get days off, he'd say as he left the house, dressed sharper than usual, even wearing cologne and accessories he didn't normally use. I had my suspicions, but with no evidence, confronting him would be pointless. Besides, even if David was cheating, I was torn about what I should do. I knew it would be better to part ways, but thinking of Mia, it wasn't an easy decision. Every day, I agonized over the potential consequences for Mia of taking her father away from her. Our lives continued in this way, but a turning point was soon to come. One Monday morning, as I was preparing for work, Mia didn't get up as usual, and I was getting anxious that she'd be late for school. Mia, it's morning. You need to get up or you'll be late for school. When I went to Mia's room to wake her up, she looked completely drained. I rushed to her side, placing my hand on her forehead. You're burning up, Mia. Yeah, I got a thermometer and took her temperature. It read 103 degrees Fahrenheit. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't take the day off today. I had an important meeting. While I was panicking, David entered the room. What happened, David? Mia is running a high fever. I can't take the day off from work today. Maybe we should call a babysitter. A babysitter. I'll take care of her. Just let her rest, all right? I can make her some soup. It'll be fine. I was utterly taken aback by David's sudden willingness to take care of Mia. David, who had never lifted a finger to help with household chores or child rearing, now offering to care for our daughter when she's sick. Unbelievable. Though I found it hard to believe, I decided to trust him given the urgency of the situation. All right, thank you. There's some fruit in the fridge. Give her some if she feels like eating. Got it. Relieved by David's reassuring response, I hurriedly got ready and left the house. I was deeply concerned about Mia, but arriving at work on time was my top priority for the moment. By the time I reached my office in New York, the skies had darkened and it had started raining. Fortunately, I had a foldable umbrella with me, so I reached the office without getting wet. The meeting began in the afternoon as scheduled, but I couldn't stop thinking about Mia. The office was abuzz due to the sound of heavy rain and strong winds from outside. Come to think of it, wasn't there news about a hurricane approaching? I'd been so busy lately that I hadn't been keeping up with the weather updates, but I remembered a warning about a hurricane making landfall tonight. During the meeting, all of my colleagues, including myself, were constantly distracted by the storm outside, frequently glancing out the windows. By 7 o'clock p.m., when I was finally done with work and heading home, the earlier storm had turned into a torrential downpour, causing several train delays. The train I was supposed to catch was also delayed, and the platform was packed with people. I was really worried about Mia, who was running a high fever and couldn't bear the thought of waiting there. I hurriedly left the station and began looking for a taxi. There were many others waiting for taxis too, so it took quite a while, but after about 30 minutes I finally managed to hail one. After a 30-minute ride, I arrived home but was speechless at the sight that greeted me. Mia. To my horror, Mia was lying unconscious in front of our entrance. I quickly scooped her up. "Mia, are you okay? What happened, Daddy?" Seeing me might have comforted her, as after she whispered, "Daddy," she just slumped, looking exhausted. Despite being drenched in rain, her body was burning up. I turned to the taxi I just got off from and knocked on the window. "I'm sorry I need you again. Please take us to the nearest hospital." Seeing Mia's condition and my desperation, the driver quickly opened the door, understanding the gravity of the situation. I quickly hopped into the taxi. "I need to get to the nearest hospital fast." "Mia, Mia," throughout the ride, I kept calling out to Mia. I felt if I didn't, something terrible might happen to her. I desperately wanted to know why she was outside in the first place, especially during a storm. But right now, saving her was more important. Despite the heavy rain and the slow-moving traffic, we finally reached the hospital. "Ma'am, do take care, especially if you're heading back in this storm," the kind taxi driver said as he dropped us off. "Thank you so much," I replied, grateful for his concern. With a kind-hearted driver seeing me off, I rushed Mia to the hospital. Even though the hospital was busy with many patients, the receptionist quickly realized the urgency upon seeing Mia's condition and got her immediate attention. 30 minutes later, a doctor finally examined Mia, informing me that she was semi-conscious due to a high fever. Thankfully, she had no physical injuries. If her fever reduces, she should be okay. However, given that she'd apparently been outside in the rain for hours with that fever, she had to be admitted immediately, the doctor explained. "Mia, I'm so sorry. I hope you feel better soon," a nurse said reassuringly. "We'll take good care of her. You should rest today," she added, acknowledging my exhaustion. After spending 5 hours at the hospital endlessly staring at Mia's pained face as she slept, a nurse finally approached me. Though I wanted to stay by Mia's side, I was exhausted both physically and mentally. Having worked all day and then seeing Mia in this state, I was spent. I decided it was best to let the nurses handle it and head home. Everything that happened to Mia was undoubtedly David's fault. Mia murmuring "Daddy" before passing out was evidence enough. It was inconceivable that Mia, with such a high fever, would willingly go outside, especially not during a storm. The more I thought about what David had done, the angrier I became. Unable to comprehend or forgive him, all the way home I pondered what to say to him. If he hears that Mia is okay, he might think it's all right to continue with his reckless behavior in the future. I absolutely don't want that to happen. I needed him to deeply reflect on his actions. Even more than feeling remorse, with a certain resolve, I headed home. When I arrived, wet from the rain, David was casually fiddling with his smartphone. Noticing me, he looked up in surprise. "Hey, where's Mia? Wasn't she sleeping?" he asked at the entrance. She said she wanted to play outside. I told her not to, but she wouldn't listen. Seeing David ask that with such nonchalance made my anger boil over. Mia went out on her own. He's the one who tossed her out in the first place. I clenched my fists tightly and replied. "She just passed away," I said, feeling a surge of emotion. "What? As I stood in the doorway, David stared at me with a dumbfounded look. The shock of hearing that his daughter had died seemed too much for him to grasp. "What are you talking about? Stop playing sick jokes. That's in bad taste," he said, incredulous. The nerve of him to mock me as I stood there, drenched from the rain. "It's not a lie. What have you done?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "I'll handle the funeral arrangements, so stay away from the house for a while." "Goodbye," I said firmly, storming out of the house. Seeing me shaking with rage, it finally hit David how serious the situation was. "Are you for real?" he blurted out, realizing the gravity of the situation. But his reaction seemed so detached, as if it was happening to someone else, which irritated me even more. I turned on my heels, the fury inside me blazing. "I won't ever forgive him. I'll drag him down to hell if I have to," I thought as I stormed out of the house. I managed to find a vacant hotel and decided to stay there for a while. Although it would cost me, now wasn't the time to worry about money. I wanted to get back at David. If he felt remorse and changed his ways after hearing about Mia's death, I might reconsider my approach. But seeing that he didn't call or message me that day, it was clear he couldn't care less about what happened to Mia. This only fueled my anger further, and I began to devise a plan to make him pay. The next morning, I woke up and immediately headed to the hospital. I got word that Mia had regained consciousness. "Mia, are you okay?" I asked anxiously. "Mom, yeah, I'm fine now. My fever's gone down," Maya replied with a weak smile. "Oh, thank goodness." I hugged Mia tightly and gently stroked her head. She giggled as if tickled by the gesture, relishing the joy of Mia's return. Eventually, I pressed her for the truth. "Mia, what happened yesterday?" "Daddy kicked me out. He said I was in the way and told me to leave," Mia explained, her voice trembling. "Then a woman came in and they chatted like they were close." "A woman? What did she look like?" I asked, feeling a sense of dread. "I didn't get a good look, but she was young. She had bright red nails and wore skinny heels." I couldn't believe it. David was having an affair. Not only did he bring his mistress home on a day Mia had a high fever, but he also locked his own daughter outside. It was beyond comprehension. How could he do something so horrible? "I'm sorry, Mia. That must have been terrifying," I said, trying to comfort her. "Yeah, but I was happy you came to save me," Maya replied, her eyes shining with gratitude. For David to put Mia through such trauma and think he could be happy with his mistress, it was unforgivable. I felt a burning rage consuming me. "By the way, Daddy said he's going to invite that lady over again next Sunday," Mia added. "Next Sunday? That's the day I'm supposed to go on the company trip. He's planning to spend a fun day with his mistress while I'm away," I exclaimed, appalled. But it strengthened my resolve. "Thanks for telling me," I patted Mia's back, vowing to get back at David. The following Sunday, I decided to take Mia and return home. I informed my company that, due to personal reasons, I wouldn't be able to attend the trip. After Mia was discharged, we had been staying at the hotel together. It had been a while since we were home, but as we approached the front door, it felt like we were entering someone else's house. "We're home," I announced as Mia and I entered the house like usual. Sure enough, there were unfamiliar high heels at the entrance, just as Mia had said. The thought of David and his mistress enjoying themselves deeper in the house made my skin crawl. David wasn't in the living room, so I headed to the bedroom, thinking that Mia might witness something too intense. I hesitated for a moment, but the room was quiet. As I listened closely, I could hear David's voice coming from the bedroom. "You know, it really worked out for me with Mia gone. It made breaking up easier," David's voice echoed through the room. "How can you say such a thing about your own daughter?" The woman's voice responded. But yeah, for me, it was kind of lucky, David continued. Hearing the two of them talking about Mia's supposed death as if it was a good thing or lucky made my head spin. It was clear now. David didn't feel an ounce of remorse. If that's the case, it's time to confront him directly, I thought, steeling myself. "Excuse us," I said as Mia and I appeared after opening the bedroom door. The two of them were taken aback, with wide eyes. "Why the hell are you here? You said you were on a company trip," David exclaimed, bewildered. "And why is Mia here?" the woman added, equally surprised. "What do you mean? Wasn't Mia supposed to be dead?" David said, his voice rising in panic. "I suppose it would be quite shocking to see Mia, who they believed to be dead, standing right in front of them," I explained calmly. "The part about Mia being dead was a lie. I'm sorry, I just wanted to see your reaction. I hoped you might show some remorse, but instead, you're here celebrating Mia's supposed death. That's just insane," I said, feeling a mix of frustration and disappointment. "A lie. Damn it, you played with my feelings," David exclaimed, his face contorted with anger. "Don't mess with me. You're the one who kicked Mia out of the house, right?" I shot back, my voice trembling with rage. "No, I didn't. Mia Daddy did kick me out. He said I was in the way because he wanted to be with that woman," Mia interjected, her voice filled with hurt. With Mia's swift revelation, David's face turned pale. "That's right, you did the worst possible thing, not just as a father, but as a human being," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Mia was in such a condition that it wouldn't have been surprising if she had died, and you prioritized being with that woman over her," I added, pointing at the woman who had been silently watching our confrontation. "Oh, calling her my mistress, that's not right. She's a colleague from work," David tried to defend himself, but his words fell flat. "Wait, didn't you say you quit your job and you're freelancing now?" I asked, catching him off guard. "Well, David hesitated, unable to come up with a convincing lie. "We don't really need to ask her now, do we? Here's the evidence of your affair." I thrust a large envelope towards David. After hearing about David's affair, I decided to get a thorough investigation, but I never imagined the evidence would pile up so quickly. "Seems like David isn't very good at hiding things," I added, watching as David's face drained of color. Hesitantly, David opened the envelope, and as he pulled out the photos, he dropped them, scattering the evidence of his affair all over the floor. "This is so unfair. Do you enjoy cornering someone like this and putting them in a situation where they can't escape?" David exclaimed, his voice shaking with anger. "Don't mess with me. You're the one who kicked Mia out of the house, right?" I shot back, my voice trembling with rage. "No, I didn't. Mia Daddy did kick me out. He said I was in the way because he wanted to be with that woman," Mia interjected, her voice filled with hurt. With Mia's swift revelation, David's face turned pale. "That's right, you did the worst possible thing, not just as a father, but as a human being," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Mia was in such a condition that it wouldn't have been surprising if she had died, and you prioritized being with that woman over her," I added, pointing at the woman who had been silently watching our confrontation. "Oh, calling her my mistress, that's not right. She's a colleague from work," David tried to defend himself, but his words fell flat. "Wait, didn't you say you quit your job and you're freelancing now?" I asked, catching him off guard. "Well, David hesitated, unable to come up with a convincing lie. "We don't really need to ask her now, do we? Here's the evidence of your affair." I thrust a large envelope towards David. After hearing about David's affair, I decided to get a thorough investigation, but I never imagined the evidence would pile up so quickly. "Seems like David isn't very good at hiding things," I added, watching as David's face drained of color. Hesitantly, David opened the envelope, and as he pulled out the photos, he dropped them, scattering the evidence of his affair all over the floor. "This is so unfair. Do you enjoy cornering someone like this and putting them in a situation where they can't escape?" David exclaimed, his voice shaking with anger. "Who's the real coward here? I see no worth in staying with someone so thoughtless any longer," I retorted, feeling a surge of determination. "Let's get a divorce," I said firmly, thrusting a business card towards David. His eyes widened as he stared at the card, realizing the gravity of the situation. "Oh, and by the way, once we're separated, you'll, of course, be responsible for asset division and child support," I continued, not giving him a chance to protest. "I'll make sure to inform your company and your parents about everything. Be prepared for that," I added, watching as David's face paled even further. I glanced at the woman, his affair partner. "As for you, what? Why me?" "I didn't know anything about this," she protested, her voice trembling with fear. "Don't you know? You destroyed a family with your actions. You have to take responsibility," I replied sternly, my eyes narrowing at her. The woman began to panic, messing up her hair in distress. Both Mia and I watched her coldly. "If you don't have the money, find a way to get it. You two are in love, right? You should be able to overcome this together. Just never show up in front of Mia and me again," I said firmly, feeling a sense of justice. "I'll give you the house, but you're still responsible for the mortgage," I added, watching as David's face contorted with shock and disbelief. "Wait," David tried to protest, but I pulled Mia away, determined to protect her from any further harm. "Yes, Mia is going to lose her father, but I have no regrets. I won't put Mia in harm's way ever again. We'll do our best from now on, okay, Maya?" I asked, looking down at her. "Yeah," Maya replied, her eyes shining with determination. Mia looked surprisingly happy, which put me at ease. I decided to go back to my childhood home with Mia and stay there for a while. My parents were livid with David for cheating and putting Mia through such pain, to the point where they felt like giving David a piece of their mind. But I managed to calm them down and avoid further issues. "You can stay here as long as you need," my mom said warmly, hugging Mia tightly. "Thank you both," I replied gratefully, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. For now, everything seemed all right. As for David, he got a lawyer and managed to settle the child support and asset division in one payment. I couldn't imagine David having millions saved up, so he probably took on some debt. And with the remaining mortgage to pay off, David must be stretched pretty thin right now. A coworker from my company who went to high school with David updated me about him. Apparently, he ended up breaking up with his mistress. David had boasted to her about having money, so when the truth came out, they quickly parted ways. David's income was already halved from what he used to make as a salaried employee, so it's understandable. Now, in addition to his freelance work, he's scrambling with various part-time jobs. After losing his wife, daughter, and mistress, David will probably live a frugal life, paying off his debts. He got what he deserved. I hope he learns from his hardships and regrets his actions. "Mommy, today at school I made Grandparents' Day gifts for Grandma and Grandpa," Maya said excitedly. "Really? Let's give it to them later together, okay?" I replied, smiling at Mia. Seeing Mia so lively and happy, even without David around, made me feel content. From now on, I'm going to move forward at my own pace, with Mia by my side.
Life in Dallas, Texas, had always seemed perfect from the outside. But behind the walls of our neat suburban home, things were far from ideal. My name is Lisa, and I'm 35 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a local office, and my life revolves around my two children, Mark and Naomi, and my husband, Alan. Alan is a 40-year-old engineer with a cold demeanor that always felt more like a distant ice than a warm embrace. Mark, my 12-year-old son, has always been the apple of Alan's eye. He's bright, handsome, and full of charm. Alan and his mother, Ruth, often dote on him, showering him with praise and affection. On the other hand, Naomi, my 10-year-old daughter, is the exact opposite in their eyes. She has dark black skin, curly hair, and a shy, reserved personality that makes her stand out in ways that aren't always kind. Alan's parents, Ruth and Henry, run a small chain of grocery stores that Alan is set to inherit. Every visit to their house is a reminder of the hierarchy that's been established. Mark is cherished and adored, while Naomi is left in the shadows. I remember the first time I saw the way Ruth looked at Naomi. It wasn't just a glance. It was a cold, dismissive stare that spoke volumes about how she viewed my daughter. One day, while I was preparing dinner, I overheard Alan and Ruth talking in the living room. Their conversation was casual, but it cut like a knife. "Mark is such a smart boy," Ruth said, her voice full of pride. "He's going to do great things, just like his father." Alan's response was equally unsettling. "Yeah, I just wish Naomi could be more like him. Maybe if she had a little more of my genes, she wouldn't be so different." He laughed, but it was a harsh, empty sound. I tried to ignore the sting of those words, focusing instead on keeping the household running smoothly. But every day was a struggle. Naomi felt the weight of their neglect acutely. She would retreat into her room, hiding from the world outside and the cruel comments she couldn't escape. Things were often worse during our visits to Alan's parents. Ruth and Henry's home was a grand place, filled with opulence and the unmistakable smell of privilege. Mark was always the center of attention, his achievements lauded, and his every whim catered to. Naomi, on the other hand, was often ignored or given terse, cold responses. I tried to make up for it with hugs and encouragement, but it was clear that her father and grandparents couldn't see beyond her appearance. One particularly harsh moment stands out in my memory. We were at Ruth and Henry's for dinner. The table was beautifully set, and Mark was regaling everyone with stories from school. Naomi sat quietly at the end of the table, her meal untouched. Ruth's eyes flicked towards her with barely concealed disdain. "Naomi, dear, why don't you eat something? You're so thin. Maybe if you tried harder, you'd be more like your brother." Naomi's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I could see the tears welling in her eyes as she pushed her plate away. Alan's silence was a punch to the gut. He offered no support, no reassurance. It was as if Naomi's pain was inconsequential to him. My heart broke for her, but there was little I could do. Alan's behavior was entrenched, and Ruth and Henry's favoritism was a constant barrier. I found solace in the small moments when Mark and Naomi were away from the critical eyes of Alan's family. At home, I tried to create a safe space for Naomi, filled with love and encouragement, but it often felt like a temporary reprieve. The turning point came one Saturday morning when Ruth offered to take Mark and Naomi to the local zoo. I should have been relieved, thinking it would be a nice day out for them. However, my relief was short-lived. As Ruth returned home later that day, she carried a tired Mark on her back but had left Naomi behind at the zoo, expecting her to find her way home alone. Panic gripped me as soon as I saw Ruth walking through the door without Naomi. "Where's Naomi?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. Ruth's response was nonchalant. "She's fine. I left her at the zoo. She can manage." Mark was tired, so I brought him home early. I didn't waste another second. I rushed to the zoo, my heart pounding with every step. When I arrived, I found Naomi sitting on a bench, tears streaming down her face. A kind zoo employee was trying to comfort her. Naomi's distress was palpable, and it was clear that she had been abandoned in a place that should have been fun and safe. Seeing Naomi in that state was a wake-up call for me. The neglect and emotional abuse had reached a new, terrifying level. I knew then that things had to change, but the path forward seemed fraught with uncertainty and fear. As we drove home, Naomi's silent tears were a stark reminder of the painful reality we faced. It was clear that my family needed to confront these issues head-on, but the fear of what would come next was overwhelming. The incident at the zoo was a turning point I couldn't ignore, but it was only the beginning of a series of painful realizations. I returned home with Naomi, who had been silent and withdrawn ever since the zoo. Her usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by an aura of sadness that I couldn't ignore. I tried to comfort her with kind words and hugs, but nothing seemed to ease her pain. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I knew I had to confront Alan about what had happened. I waited until after the children were asleep, hoping for a calm discussion. Alan came home from work, his demeanor as indifferent as always. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I took a deep breath. "Alan, we need to talk about today," I began, my voice trembling slightly. Alan looked up from his newspaper, his eyes narrowing. "What about it?" "Ruth left Naomi at the zoo, expecting her to find her way home alone," I said. "She was in tears when I got there. This isn't the first time Naomi's been treated this way." Alan's face hardened. "I've told you before, Naomi is different. She doesn't fit in with our family. Maybe if she were more like Mark, things would be different." His words cut through me like a knife. "Different? You mean because of her skin color and curly hair?" "Alan, she's our daughter. She deserves love and respect, not cruelty." Alan's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't start with this again. I'm tired of your excuses. Naomi's not my fault. If she had been more like Mark, maybe she wouldn't be such a problem." I felt my heart sink. This conversation was leading nowhere, and Alan's lack of empathy was evident. I tried to reason with him, but it felt like talking to a brick wall. The conversation ended with Alan storming out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. The following days were no better. Alan's disdain for Naomi was evident in his every action. He openly questioned her paternity, making hurtful remarks about her appearance and intelligence. I often found myself trying to shield Naomi from his harsh words, but the emotional damage was accumulating. One evening, Alan's cruelty reached new heights. He returned home visibly angry, his frustration spilling over. "Naomi's school supplies are a mess," he snapped. "Why does she need so many? She's not even trying to do well in school. She's failing, and it's time she started paying back for everything we've done for her." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Alan's words were a devastating blow. He demanded that Naomi quit school and start working to contribute to the family. It was a crushing blow to her self-esteem and her future. Naomi had always been a dedicated student, but Alan's oppressive demands were suffocating her spirit. I knew I had to take action, but fear gripped me. Our financial situation was precarious, and I wasn't sure how we could manage on our own. Alan's job as an engineer provided the bulk of our income, and I had only a modest salary. The thought of leaving him seemed impossible, given our financial instability. Yet, as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the toll Alan's behavior was taking on Naomi. Her once bright eyes were now clouded with sadness, and her academic performance suffered as she struggled to cope with the emotional weight. I felt a growing urgency to protect her from further harm. Then, one rainy evening, I reached my breaking point. Alan had come home, his temper flaring after a bad day at work. He stormed into the living room, his anger palpable. "I've had enough of Naomi's excuses," he shouted. "She's not contributing anything to this family. If she wants to stay, she needs to start working and paying us back." Naomi, who had been quietly sitting in her room, overheard the argument. She came out with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please don't make me leave school. I want to learn. I want to be someone." Seeing her so broken was the final straw. I couldn't let Alan continue to destroy Naomi's spirit. As I looked at my daughter, I realized that our situation was unsustainable. It wasn't just about financial security anymore. It was about our emotional well-being and our right to live without fear and cruelty. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't keep enduring this abuse and neglect. I had to protect Naomi, even if it meant facing the unknown. I resolved to leave Alan, to seek a safer and healthier environment for my children. The thought of leaving behind our home and facing financial uncertainty was terrifying, but I knew it was the only way forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I gathered our essential belongings, trying to stay as organized as possible while managing my growing anxiety. Mark, who had recently moved into his own apartment, was supportive when I reached out to him. He offered us a place to stay, and his support gave me the strength I needed. With heavy hearts and rain pouring down outside, I packed up Naomi and our belongings. It was a bittersweet farewell to a life that had been filled with pain and neglect. As we drove to Mark's apartment, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of hope and fear. We were leaving behind everything we had known, but we were also stepping into a future where we could rebuild our lives and find the happiness and respect that had long been denied to us. As we arrived at Mark's apartment, I looked at Naomi, who was still apprehensive but hopeful. We were about to start a new chapter, one that I hoped would bring us the peace and love we so desperately needed. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I knew it was a journey worth taking for the sake of my children and their future. Leaving Alan was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. As we settled into Mark's apartment, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. It was a new beginning, but it came with its own set of challenges. Mark, at just 21, had managed to carve out a small but comfortable life for himself. His apartment was modest, but it was a safe haven for Naomi and me. Naomi was initially quiet, overwhelmed by the changes and the emotional strain she had endured. I tried to create a sense of normalcy for her, encouraging her to focus on her studies and hobbies. Mark, though young, was incredibly supportive. He made sure we felt welcomed and at ease, always checking in to see if we needed anything. As weeks turned into months, Naomi began to open up more. She started to show signs of her old self. Her laughter came back, and she regained her enthusiasm for school. It was a slow process, but each small step was a victory. Mark and I worked hard to provide a stable environment, making sure Naomi felt loved and secure. One day, while Mark was at work, I took Naomi to a local community center. They had a variety of activities and programs, including tutoring and art classes. Naomi had always enjoyed painting, so I signed her up for an art class. I watched as she immersed herself in her work, her face lighting up with the joy of creation. It was a stark contrast to the sadness she had shown during the final days at home with Alan. During this period, I also started looking for a job. The financial strain was real, and I knew I needed to contribute to our household. Finding a job was challenging, but I was determined to make it work. After several interviews and rejections, I finally secured a position as an administrative assistant at a local firm. It wasn't a dream job, but it provided stability and helped us get back on our feet. Life in Dallas began to take on a semblance of normalcy. Naomi continued to thrive in school and her art classes, while Mark and I adjusted to our new routines. We began to explore the city, discovering new parks, libraries, and restaurants. The simple joys of everyday life started to heal the wounds from our past. One day, while Mark and I were at home discussing plans for the weekend, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I answered. On the other end was Ruth, Alan's mother. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Lisa, I hope you're well," she began. "I've been trying to reach you." I was taken aback. Ruth had been a harsh critic of Naomi, and I had not expected to hear from her. "Why are you calling?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to apologize for how we treated Naomi," Ruth said, her voice trembling slightly. "Alan has been having a hard time since he left. He's lost his job and the grocery stores. We're struggling, and I've realized how wrong we were." I listened in silence, feeling a mix of emotions. Ruth's apology seemed sincere, but it also stirred up old wounds. "I appreciate your apology, Ruth," I said finally. "But Naomi and I have moved on. We've worked hard to build a new life, and we're finally finding some peace." Ruth's voice was tinged with regret. "I understand. I just wanted to reach out and let you know that I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change the past, but I wanted to say it." We ended the call on a somber note. Ruth's apology was a small but significant acknowledgement of the wrongs done to Naomi. It didn't undo the damage, but it was a step toward closure. As we continued to rebuild our lives, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. Naomi was excelling in school, making new friends, and developing her artistic talent. Mark was thriving in his job and had even begun to date someone he cared about. I was finding my own footing in my new job, and despite the challenges, there was a sense of hope in our lives. But just when it seemed like everything was settling, another unexpected twist emerged. Alan, now unemployed and struggling, showed up at Mark's apartment. He looked disheveled and exhausted. My heart sank at the sight of him. The man who had caused so much pain was standing on our doorstep. Mark answered the door, his expression a mix of shock and concern. Alan tried to explain his situation, but the words were hollow. He spoke of losing his job, his house, and how he had ended up homeless. He was seeking reconciliation, desperate for forgiveness. As I stood in the background, I felt a surge of emotions. Anger, sadness, and confusion swirled within me. Alan's presence was a painful reminder of the past, but it also highlighted how far we had come. The family we had left behind was now in turmoil, while we were slowly finding our way to a better future. This unexpected visit from Alan was a harsh reminder of the past, but it also reinforced our resolve to stay true to the life we had built. Naomi, Mark, and I had come so far, and the prospect of returning to the old, painful dynamics was something we could no longer entertain. As Alan left, his pleas unanswered, I took a deep breath and looked at Naomi and Mark. We had survived the storm, and we were emerging stronger and more resilient. Our journey wasn't over, but we were navigating it together, with hope and determination guiding us forward. Years passed, and our lives continued to unfold in ways I had only dreamed of during the hardest times. Naomi, now a confident and accomplished young woman, was preparing for her wedding. The thought of her walking down the aisle filled me with pride and joy, a testament to how far we had come from the dark days of our past. Mark, too, had found his path. He was well established in his career and had met someone special. His happiness and success were heartwarming to witness, and I couldn't have been more proud of the man he had become. Our new family dynamic was loving and supportive, and it was a stark contrast to the toxicity we had once known. As Naomi's wedding day approached, our lives were filled with anticipation and excitement. The preparations were in full swing, and Naomi was radiant in her joy. Her wedding dress, chosen with care, fit perfectly, and every detail of the ceremony was thoughtfully planned. I watched her with a mixture of disbelief and happiness, marveling at the strength and grace she had developed over the years. The wedding day was beautiful. Naomi walked down the aisle, looking every bit the princess she deserved to be. The ceremony was intimate, surrounded by friends and family who had supported us through thick and thin. Naomi's happiness was contagious, and it was clear to everyone that she had found someone who cherished her for who she was. During the reception, as I looked around at the smiling faces, I was reminded of the long journey we had taken to get here. It was a moment of reflection, a time to appreciate the resilience and love that had carried us through the darkest times. Naomi danced with her new husband, and Mark gave a heartfelt toast, celebrating his sister's happiness and the new chapter in our lives. However, amidst the joy, there was one figure missing from our celebration: Alan. The pain he had caused was still fresh, and the decision to exclude him from this pivotal moment was both easy and necessary. We had moved on from the hurt he inflicted, and including him in such a special occasion felt wrong. The absence of his presence was a testament to the boundaries we had set to protect our newfound peace. The final twist in our journey came when, just a few weeks after the wedding, I had an unexpected encounter. I was out shopping when I saw Ruth, Alan's mother. She looked different, older and wearier. I had heard that she had fallen on hard times, much like Alan. Ruth approached me hesitantly, her face etched with a mix of hope and regret. "Lisa," she said, her voice trembling, "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to see how Naomi and Mark are. I've heard they're doing great." I was taken aback, but maintained my composure. "They're doing well, Ruth. Naomi is now happily married, and Mark is thriving in his career. We've built a good life for ourselves." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm so sorry for everything that